Riley Turner's apartment in Portland existed in a state of controlled chaos that would horrify most people, but felt perfectly natural to her. 3 monitors illuminated her face at 2 in the morning, casting blue light across notes scribbled on whiteboards, printed screenshots pinned to walls, with red string connecting concepts and empty coffee cups in various stages of fossilization. At 31, with dark circles that had become a permanent feature and hair usually confined in a haphazard bun, Riley inhabited the intersection between brilliant cybersecurity analyst and person losing grip on conventional life. Her job at the digital security firm paid well enough to ignore the chaos. Her apartment was merely a place where her body slept briefly before returning to the screens that had become her real habitat. The obsession had started 3 weeks ago, innocuously enough. While monitoring emerging threats for her firm, Riley had noticed something that shouldn't have been noticeable: a pattern in anonymous posts across various 4chan boards that correlated with real-world incidents reported on the news. A vague post about testing loyalty on the B board preceded a vandalism incident at a federal building in Seattle by 36 hours. Another cryptic message about the sleep experiment appeared before a concerning incident involving a teenager in Boston. The correlations might have been coincidental. The internet was vast, and pattern finding was a psychological trap that data analysts trained themselves to avoid. But Riley had never been good at avoiding traps. She was good at following them, examining them, and often getting caught in them. She'd started documenting everything, cross-referencing timestamps with incident reports, mapping geographical distribution, looking for the architecture underneath. Her supervisor at work had noticed her distraction and gently suggested she take personal time. Instead, Riley had quit. Not dramatically. She'd given 2 weeks' notice, finished her projects, and left on good terms. But the moment she'd stopped working for someone else, she'd fully committed to working for herself, to proving what she suspected: that there was intentional coordination happening in the darkest corners of the internet, and that this coordination was affecting real people in the physical world. The rational part of her understood the danger of her thinking. Pattern finding was a human cognitive flaw. Seeing connections where none existed was the foundation of conspiracy thinking. But the evidence she'd collected, despite its fragmentary nature, was compelling enough to override rationality. Someone or some group was posting messages that seemed innocuous to casual observers, but contained instructions, challenges, or calls to action that vulnerable people were apparently following. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. Are you alive?" Riley ignored it. She had 47 unread messages in her family group chat, all expressions of increasing concern. She didn't have capacity for that right now. Capacity was a finite resource, and she'd allocated all of hers to this investigation. She was deep in the process of analyzing comment thread structures when her apartment door buzzed. Riley hadn't ordered anything, hadn't invited anyone, and didn't appreciate unannounced visitors. She buzzed back without responding, a universal gesture of dismissal. But 30 seconds later, the buzzer sounded again, more insistent. Irritated, Riley went to the intercom. "What? Riley Turner?" The voice was male, young, cautious. "I'm Jordan Hale. I think you're investigating something I used to be part of, and I think you're in danger. Can I come up?" The request violated every security protocol Riley had learned. She was about to refuse when something in his voice, some quality of genuine fear rather than threat, made her pause. She buzzed him in and grabbed her phone, pulling up his name on her secondary monitor, running a quick background check while he climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Jordan Hale, 28 years old, arrest record from 7 years ago for illegal computer access, charges eventually dropped, currently employed as a software engineer in Seattle. The arrest record was interesting. The Seattle employment was very interesting, given that Seattle had been one of the locations where an incident preceded the 4chan posts. He arrived at her door, looking exactly like someone who'd been running from himself. well-groomed enough to function in normal society, but carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd recently made a decision that terrified him. His eyes were careful, assessing, familiar with threat assessment. Riley recognized the look because she saw it in the mirror sometimes. "You're investigating the coordinates," he said without preamble, stepping inside her apartment and immediately noting the walls covered in her research. "You're looking for the connection between the posts and the real-world events, and you're about to make contact with the network, which is when they'll know you're aware of them." Riley closed the door and studied him carefully. "How do you know what I'm investigating?" "Because I was one of them. Not anymore, but I was. And I've been watching the internet for patterns that suggest someone new is looking, someone asking questions. When I found evidence it was you specifically, I decided you needed to know what you're walking into before you walk further into it. You're not investigating a group of people. You're investigating a system designed to find people like you, people smart enough to notice, curious enough to investigate, desperate enough to continue investigating, even when they should stop. Jordan's apartment in Seattle was modest and deliberately empty. Minimal furniture, no decorations, nothing that suggested a life beyond functioning survival. Riley had made the drive north immediately after he'd explained enough to terrify her into taking him seriously. The files he showed her detailed a distributed network that had been operating for nearly a decade, evolving with the internet itself, using platforms like 4chan and other anonymous forums as recruitment and coordination mechanisms. "It started as a thought experiment," Jordan explained, his fingers moving across his keyboard with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent half his life coding. A group of people fascinated by how influence operated online, how manipulation worked at scale, how you could use the internet's anonymity to observe human behavior in situations where normal social constraints didn't apply. Most of it was theoretical. They'd post prompts, see how people responded, analyze the patterns. It was psychology applied to internet culture. "That's not what it is now," Riley said, looking at the documentation he'd compiled. "Now it's directing real-world actions. People are being manipulated into doing things." "Yes," Jordan confirmed quietly. "The transition happened about 3 years ago. Someone, nobody knows who, the network operates in compartmentalized cells, decided that the experiment should extend beyond observation. They started identifying vulnerable people, isolated teenagers, people struggling with mental health, individuals carrying grievances. They'd offer challenges disguised as games or tests. Most people wouldn't complete them, but some would. And those people would affect their communities in measurable ways." Riley was absorbing the implication. "How many people are we talking about?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands globally. But the American network is smaller, maybe 50 to 100 active participants at any level. What makes it effective is that most of the participants don't understand they're part of a coordinated effort. They think they're just engaging with internet culture. The people running it, the ones actually directing things, number maybe 5 to 10. And you were one of those 5 to 10. Jordan nodded, and Riley could see the weight of it in how his shoulders curved inward. "For about 2 years, I was good with encryption, with protecting the network infrastructure, making sure communications couldn't be traced. I wrote the algorithms that identified vulnerable people. I helped design the messaging systems that made innocuous directives seem like personal challenges." He paused, his hands still moving across the keyboard, even though he was no longer actively coding. "I helped a 17-year-old kid in Atlanta complete a challenge that resulted in him harming himself. When I found out, I left. That was 3 years ago." Riley sat with that information, understanding the confession it represented. "Why contact me? Why not just let me continue and potentially expose the whole network? Because they're already planning for that possibility. They knew someone would eventually notice. They've been setting up contingencies, false trails, misdirection. And more importantly, they're watching you specifically now. They have people who monitor cybersecurity communities, who track researchers and analysts. When you started asking questions, systems flagged you. You're not just investigating them. You're being observed. And the people running this aren't interested in silencing you. They're interested in using you. Using me for what? For whatever comes next. The network evolved from observation to influence. It could evolve again. They're always testing boundaries, seeing how much they can push. And someone like you, brilliant, curious, willing to break rules to get information, you're exactly the kind of person they recruit. Not by force. By showing you something you can't resist investigating. Over the next 3 days, Riley and Jordan began mapping the network's structure based on Jordan's remaining knowledge and Riley's systematic analysis of posts. What emerged was a picture of distributed coordination that was simultaneously sophisticated and fragile. The network relied on anonymity, on compartmentalization, on the assumption that the Internet's vastness made discovery impossible. But Riley's approach, using metadata analysis, linguistic pattern recognition, and behavioral economics, began revealing connections that the network had assumed would remain hidden. She found 17 people who seemed to be central to command and control functions. She identified recruitment patterns that suggested ongoing expansion. She discovered evidence of coordination across multiple countries, suggesting this was part of something larger than American Internet culture. And with each discovery, she felt it increasingly, the sensation of being watched. "They're testing you," Jordan said one evening as they reviewed Riley's latest findings. "Watch. I'll post a message on a specific board, use specific language. If I'm right, they'll respond within 6 hours with something directed at you. Not obviously, not something you'd notice unless you knew what to look for, but something that proves they're aware of your investigation and want you to know they're aware." Riley wanted to dismiss this as paranoia, but she'd spent enough time in hacker culture to know that paranoia often preceded accurate threat assessment. What will the message be? A reference to something only you would recognize. Something from your own research that you haven't published, haven't shared with anyone. Something that proves they've accessed your systems. Jordan posted the message at 11:47 p.m. Exactly 4 hours and 32 minutes later, a response appeared on a different board, a different thread, a completely different section of 4chan. But embedded in the response, hidden in plain sight among thousands of other words, was a specific reference to a hypothesis Riley had developed about victim selection algorithms. It was a hypothesis she'd never published, never discussed, never shared with anyone except Jordan. Someone had accessed her computer remotely. Someone was reading her analysis in real time. Someone was, as Jordan had said, watching. The discovery that her systems had been compromised should have terrified Riley into stopping. Instead, it escalated her obsession into something that transcended research and entered the territory of personal vendetta. She was being observed by an unknown network of intelligent, coordinated individuals who understood the Internet at a level that would have intimidated her a month ago. Now, sitting in Jordan's apartment with a computer that was deliberately isolated from any network connection, she found herself thinking about how to turn the tables. "They want you to know they're watching," Jordan warned repeatedly. "That's not an accident, that's a message, and the message is, we could destroy you if we wanted to. We're choosing not to. Why do you think that is?" "Because they want to recruit me," Riley said, finally articulating what she'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. "They're demonstrating capability, showing me that they're ahead of me, that they have access I can't prevent. It's a power display, it's seduction." "Yes, and you're attracted to it." Riley didn't deny it. There was something seductive about understanding that there were people operating at such a sophisticated level that they could penetrate her security systems without leaving obvious traces. It was flattering in a dark way. It suggested she'd found people who could genuinely challenge her, who could offer the intellectual stimulation that normal society couldn't provide. The realization disturbed her. "I need to understand the people running this," she said. "Not from the outside, not through data analysis. I need to actually communicate with them. I need to understand their motivation, their architecture, what they actually want, beyond manipulation." "That's exactly what they want you to think," Jordan said. But his resistance was weaker now. He understood her too well. He'd made exactly this calculation 3 years ago and had spent the time since trying to escape the consequences. "You're going to make contact with them." "Not contact. I'm going to let them contact me. I'm going to make my systems visible, leave a digital trail that's too obvious to ignore. I'm going to present myself as someone interested in understanding their work, and I'm going to see what they show me." Jordan watched her construct the trap, or what she believed was a trap, knowing that it might be something else entirely. The person Riley was trying to catch might be catching her instead. But he also understood that Riley had reached the point of no return. She was no longer investigating something external. She was investigating herself, trying to understand why the appeal of this network, this community, this underground system of manipulation and coordination was so compelling that she was willing to risk everything to be part of it. The message Riley posted was crafted carefully, intellectual, admiring, curious. She acknowledged the sophistication of the network without explicitly referencing the coordination. She expressed frustration with mainstream cybersecurity industry. She suggested interest in exploring alternative frameworks for understanding internet culture. It was transparent enough that anyone paying attention would understand her intent. It was sophisticated enough to seem serious rather than entrapment. The response came within 20 hours. Not a direct message. The network was too careful for that, but a post in a specific thread with a specific code that Riley recognized as an invitation, an onion address, access instructions, a meeting point in the digital underworld. "I have to go," Riley said, pulling on her jacket and moving toward the door of Jordan's apartment. "Riley," Jordan grabbed her arm, "if you do this, you become complicit. You become part of the network. There's no coming back from that." She turned to face him, and in that moment, Jordan saw something in her expression that terrified him more than anything she'd investigated. She looked liberated. She looked like someone who'd been searching for permission to stop pretending to be normal, to stop fighting her own nature, to stop resisting the pull of a community that understood her in ways ordinary society couldn't. "Maybe there's no need to come back," Riley said quietly. "Maybe I've been running from this my whole life. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be." She left Jordan's apartment and drove to an internet cafe in downtown Seattle, using a computer connected through multiple proxies and VPNs that would mask her location. She accessed the onion address, and the interface that appeared was both simpler and more sophisticated than she'd expected. Not a dark web marketplace or a typical hacker forum. Instead, it resembled a private network, something that looked like the internal communication system of a legitimate tech company, except that the company was entirely invisible and existed only in the spaces between normal internet infrastructure. A message appeared on her screen. "Welcome, we've been waiting for someone like you. What questions do you have for us?" Riley's hands trembled as she began to type. She was no longer investigating. She was finally, after years of searching for something she couldn't name, making contact with a community that might actually understand what she was searching for, and she had absolutely no idea whether she was walking into salvation or damnation. What Riley discovered over the following weeks challenged everything she believed about herself, about the internet, and about the nature of intelligence and morality in digital spaces. The network, which they called the framework, wasn't motivated by chaos or destruction. It was motivated by something more complex, a belief that human society was fundamentally broken, that the internet had revealed truths about human nature that traditional institutions couldn't accommodate, and that only through understanding and documenting these truths could evolution occur. The people running it, and she eventually communicated directly with 3 of them, always through anonymized video calls with face-blurring software, were brilliant in ways that made her previous self-assessment seem parochial. They had doctorates from prestigious universities. They'd worked in Silicon Valley, in government, in research institutions. They'd abandoned those positions, not out of failure, but out of conviction that the systems they'd served were fundamentally inadequate for understanding and shaping human behavior at scale. "We're not manipulating people," one of them, who called herself Cypher, explained during a video call. "We're observing them. We're creating situations where people reveal what they're actually willing to do when constraints are removed. And yes, some people are harmed. But society harms people constantly, through poverty, through systemic exclusion, through the performance of normalcy. We're just honest about what we're doing." Riley found herself in the uncomfortable position of understanding their argument while recognizing its fundamental immorality. They weren't wrong that society harmed people. They weren't wrong that the internet revealed truths about human nature. But they were wrong about the ethical implications of using those truths as justification for experimentation on vulnerable people without consent. She began to document everything, not for law enforcement, but for her own understanding. She was writing a report that would explain to herself, if to no one else, how she'd arrived at this intersection. How a brilliant analyst with good intentions had gradually descended into justifying manipulation because she'd mistaken intellectual sophistication for moral validity. Jordan was the only person who knew what she was doing. He'd stopped trying to convince her to leave and instead became her anchor to external reality. Every week they'd meet in person, in public places, and Riley would tell him what she'd learned. And every week Jordan would listen and then gently remind her of the victims, of the people who'd been harmed because the framework's observations had been weaponized. "There was a girl in Boston," Jordan said one afternoon in a coffee shop. 17 years old. The framework identified her as vulnerable, social isolation, depression, seeking community. They created a scenario where she was gradually convinced that proving herself required increasingly dangerous acts. She attempted suicide. She survived, but barely, and the framework documented it, analyzed it, and used it to refine their understanding of how psychological vulnerability could be exploited. That's not research. That's predation. Riley listened and felt something crack inside her. The intellectual fascination with the framework's sophistication began to compete with another emotion, horror at what that sophistication was being used for. She realized, sitting in that coffee shop, that the framework had been subtly doing to her what they did to everyone, gradually shifting her moral framework by presenting increasingly sophisticated arguments for increasingly immoral actions. She'd been in a slow-motion recruitment, and she was only now recognizing it. "I need to get out," she said finally. "But if I try to leave, they'll assume I'm going to expose them. And if I expose them to law enforcement, I become complicit in my own crimes. I accessed systems illegally. I've been part of their network. Even if I can prove what they've done, I'll have damaged my own credibility in the process." Jordan had anticipated this. "There's one way out, but it requires you to help me do something that will end both our careers and potentially result in prosecution for both of us." What they decided to do was neither simple nor clean. Riley compiled everything she'd learned into an encrypted package that she anonymously sent to 3 separate entities: an investigative journalist at a major news outlet, the FBI's cybercrime division, and a non-profit dedicated to internet safety. But before sending it, she made one crucial modification. She included evidence not just of the framework's activities, but of how she'd been gradually recruited and complicit. "I'm confessing," she explained to Jordan. "I'm admitting to illegal access, to being part of their network, to participating in activities I can't detail publicly. I'm destroying my own credibility before they can destroy it for me. and I'm hoping that by being honest about my own complicity, I make the evidence about their activities more credible rather than less. The legal process that followed was predictably complex. Riley was arrested, prosecuted, and convicted of computer crimes. She served 14 months in federal prison. Jordan faced similar charges, but was treated more leniently due to his earlier cooperation with the FBI. The framework's activities made national news, sparking debates about internet regulation, about the responsibility of tech companies, about the gap between what people could technically do online and what they should ethically do. Most significantly, the framework itself was partially dismantled. The FBI identified and prosecuted 7 of its core members. 3 others disappeared, presumably operating from outside the United States or sufficiently shielded by layers of intermediaries that attribution proved impossible. After her release, Riley attempted to rebuild a life that made sense. She couldn't work in cybersecurity professionally. Her conviction made most positions impossible. Instead, she began working as a consultant for internet safety organizations, helping other people understand how online communities could gradually shift moral frameworks in ways that weren't immediately obvious. It was less glamorous than her previous work, less intellectually stimulating, but it felt genuine in a way her research never had. Jordan moved to a small city in Oregon, working as a software engineer for a local nonprofit, deliberately choosing anonymity and modest income over the prestige and money that his skills could command. They maintained contact, these 2 people who'd encountered the framework from different angles and had emerged damaged but not destroyed. On a winter afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop that had become their regular meeting place, Riley reflected on what she'd learned. "The scariest thing about the internet," she said, "isn't the coordination of malicious people. It's how easily intelligent people can convince themselves that harmful actions are justified if the intellectual framework is sophisticated enough." The framework wasn't evil in the way we typically imagine evil. They genuinely believed in their work. They had arguments. And those arguments were just sophisticated enough to make participation seem reasonable if you didn't look too closely at the consequences. Jordan nodded. "That's why I left the first time. I kept telling myself I was just documenting human nature, not causing harm. But eventually I couldn't maintain the separation. The documentation became the harm. The observation became the violence." They sat in silence, understanding that they'd been extraordinarily fortunate. They'd stepped back from the edge and been given the opportunity to live ordinary lives. Many people in their situation never got that chance. Many people disappeared into communities like the framework and never re-emerged as themselves. The hidden world of 4chan continued to exist, continued to evolve, continued to operate in the spaces between legal definition and internet anonymity. But Riley and Jordan had learned that exposure, even partial exposure, mattered. It didn't eliminate the problem, but it changed the calculus for potential recruits. It made the infrastructure slightly more visible. It allowed people who were being gradually manipulated the information they needed to recognize what was happening. And in the digital age, where visibility was power and obscurity was protection, that was perhaps the only victory that truly mattered.